When did this begin? Because you always hear it. You know, there's some really nasty stuff going on. I mean, look at the Rodney King case. After all, there's this other case down there in New Orleans where the police were running this racketeering enterprise, shaking down and sometimes murdering tourists and drug dealers as well. And then there's this falsification of evidence in order to take drug dealers out of the community in Philadelphia. Well, the police take over their drug distribution networks. And then there's the LAPD, and then there's the Chicago PD. And you know, if things keep going on this way, we're going to end up in a police state. Well, maybe we want to interrogate this beast a little more to find out if we really have a need to be concerned that we're gonna end up in a police state, as opposed to maybe at some point, and the question would be when, already got there. Instead of trying to prevent something, we need to be figuring out how to undo something, and it's a radically different project between those two things. It has to do with consciousness. It takes, I guess, a framework of analysis to approach the thing. And let me submit one to you, because it's sort of the operant one that I'm utilizing not only in this talk, but in most of my work. And it came from one of the founders of the Black Panther Party across the bay in Oakland, Huey P. Newton. And Huey had the ability to encapsulate relatively complex ideas in a couple sentences and make them accessible to people. This is a political proposition, and we're talking about political elements and dynamics here. We're talking about political goals and objectives and political agendas and political processes and procedures. And that's what the Panthers were talking about. And Huey quite explicitly so. He said we're political beings. We're engaged in a political struggle. This is all about politics. But in order to be about politics, you have to understand what politics is. Politics, he said, is the ability to define a phenomena and cause it to act in a desired manner. Simple as that. Heavy statement, actually, when you break it down. Heavy in terms of what it is that goes into causing the phenomena we're up against to act in a desired manner. Usually to go away is the desired result. How to make them go away becomes something worthy of some serious consideration. But what gets glossed over and placing the emphasis there is in order to cause it, no matter how heavy the proposition of causation may be, in order to cause it to act in a desired manner, you first have to be able to define the phenomena. If you can't define what it is you're up against, you are just sort of like throwing darts with a blindfold on and hoping you at least hit the wall where the board's hanging. Sometimes you get lucky and nail a bullseye, but that's all it is, it's luck. You need something more than luck on your side if you're going to go up against phenomena like the FBI, like the aggregate power of the United States in its statist construction. So we need to look at when the FBI became the FBI in the sense that we're talking about it here. It became this political police force at a national level. And where you have a political police force at a national level, let me submit to you, you have a police state. There's no other way to view it. Well, that sense of things, we've had a police state in a formal sense since they created this monstrosity in 1913. But I'm going to argue right here and now that it predates that by a fair sight. I'm going to argue that it actually begins in 1852, the day a former Irish Fenian radical by the name of Alan Pinkerton hits the city of Chicago and decides he's going to establish a detective agency. Now, from the inception of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, you have the rudimentary ingredients of what it is we're up against today. Because, believe it or not, Ronald Reagan wasn't the first freak to run around talking about privatizing federal services. The idea of cost-cutting in Republican circles dates back to the Lincoln administration and the Civil War. And you see, the Justice Department was created during that period of time, and the Justice Department was created without much of a budget, without much by way of personnel, and certainly no investigative agency, but it was understood that in order to litigate, to prosecute federal criminals, you needed an investigative component, and so they went to the private sector. They went to the Pinkerton Detective Agency. In the process of doing that, they defined a circumstance that we're still dealing with today, because the Pinkerton Detective Agency was not retained solely by the federal government. It was retained by other private sector entities as well. Now, who do you think those were? I mean, Joe factory worker in the south side of Chicago or some ranch hand out in Kansas, sharecropper down in Mississippi? No, you're talking about major industrial concerns have the wherewithal to retain the services of an entity like the Pinkertons. And so you got this simultaneity that occurs, this interlock in incipient form at least, that occurs right then and there, where you've got the investigative apparatus and ultimately the enforcement apparatus of the federal government and of industry lodged in exactly the same entity. And the fact that the FBI today serves the interests of capital while nominally, at least, enforcing federal law at your expense should come as no surprise. You find the basic arrangement of ingredients right then and there in the mid-1860s. You also find the basis of many of the techniques that the FBI ultimately deploys in its counterintelligence programs aimed at the American public. The first of which was to create a fantasy of a subversive threat to the formal structure of power in the United States. Make it up out of whole cloth. All right? That way, you don't have any particular problem in solving the case. Since you invented it, you can solve it, you can take the credit, you can be Superman in terms of sleuthness in the process of doing that. They invented an assassination plot against Abraham Lincoln. There's no evidence anywhere that such a plot existed. Pinkerton announced it, then he intervened. He provided security service to Abraham Lincoln on the way to the inauguration. Guess what? Lincoln got inaugurated, okay, and that was a proof advanced by Pinkerton, and he was amazingly successful in thwarting the plot. As a technique, this becomes embedded in Bureau operations. Let's consider a couple of them. 1970, you have something in New York City called the Panther 21 case. And what was the Panther 21 case about? It was a claim by federal and collaborating New York Red Squad police personnel that the leadership of the Black Panther Party's chapter in New York was plotting to blow up subways, police stations, and the botanical gardens, along with several department stores using aerosol cans and enough black powder to fill a matchbox. Well, Macy's didn't get blown up, the botanical gardens is still there, the subways are still running, none of that stuff happened, therefore this timely intervention, even though all of the defendants ultimately were acquitted, was averted, they argue, on the basis of their infiltration and manipulation of the Black Panther Party. Then you had the Berrigan conspiracy plot where they were going to assassinate, or no, actually kidnap Henry Kissinger, hold him for ransom. The ransom was to be a ceasefire in Vietnam. But in the process, they were going to use demolition equipment approximately on par with that attributed to the Panthers in New York to take out a series of escape tunnels so that they could pin Kissinger down. This is a bunch of pacifists. But then again, this is the Bureau that coined the term in the 1980s, pacifist terrorist. Now put that one together, and we're going to have a quiz at the end and a prize awarded to the person who can give me a coherent definition of what the hell a pacifist terrorist might be. But you find those ingredients. Yeah, it's a manufacturing of a total hallucination, spinning it so it sounds kind of scary no matter how implausible, and then preventing this fiction from occurring and proving, therefore, that you are a barrier against devastation, protecting the well-being of the population, demonizing opponents, thereby gaining license to neutralize them. That's the name of the game. A couple of other cases drawn from that period, then I'm going to do a very fast trace out of the evolution or history of the FBI, some high points along the line, tie that back together, and wrap this up. How many people out there heard of something called the Reno Gang? Not a one. How about the James Younger Gang? Doing any better with Jesse James? Oh man, nobody grew up in cowboy movies. Jesse James. Oh yeah, that Jesse James. Not the Daltons, it'd be with the Youngers. Okay. Two fairly famous cases early on in the Pinkerton Detective Agency's history that add luster to the label of being a Pinkerton man. The Renos, not the Jameses, were the folks who invented train robbery, which really upset this major enterprise called railroaders, okay? The owners of the railroad really didn't like the idea of these hayseeds out in Indiana. This isn't even the Wild West. It's downstate Indiana, boarding the train, removing strong boxes and stuff like that. On the other hand, the people in southern Indiana kind of dug it. The reason they kind of dug it in southern Indiana and the rural population is because the federal government had this interesting little policy of going in and foreclosing their land under eminent domain and setting the price. They almost treated them like Indians, which upset them mightily. Set a price to the land. They kind of ripped them off for what they figured the real value of the land was. Then gave the land to the railroads as rights of way, or to auction back to the people that had been impounded from at a higher rate in order to raise capital to lay track, because that was in the national interest, or so federal planners said. And so the population of southern Indiana wasn't too keen on railroads, and anybody that was taken down to railroads was just okay by them. So the Pinkertons were brought in to solve it, and guess what? They couldn't. They could neither get the goods in terms of evidence on the people they knew were doing it, nor could they lay hands on the people themselves for quite a period of time. Finally, they got one, and this real interesting thing happened. These people are immensely popular in southern Indiana, but as soon as the guy is incarcerated, a lynch mob forms and goes over and takes him right out of the jail, overpowers the jailer. Jailer was just helpless, okay? Takes him out, puts a noose around his neck, says, we're going to hang you in the next 5 minutes if you don't tell us where your friends are. And terrified, he starts to divulge information. Having gotten all the information there was for him to divulge, they hanged him to make a point, and went and grabbed the other two, or the next two. Took them to the same jail. Okay? There's outrage in the county about the lynching that's just occurred, but guess what? That night a lynch mob forms and goes down and overpowers the jailer. The jailer was just helpless, just couldn't do a thing, and they take the two guys out and they put nooses around their necks, tell them if they don't divulge all the information they know about the whereabouts of the rest of the gang, they're going to kill them. Terrified, they divulged the information and they're hanged anyway. And they did the whole gang that way. Now, again, old-timers here may remember something in Southern California called the Secret Army Organization. Secret Army Organization was a right-wing vigilante group that was taking out, or attempting to take out, and at least intimidating left-wing political activists in the Los Angeles area. It turned out to be an FBI operation. Both the people that they'd retained to coordinate it and some of the SAO members themselves, and even one agent said that that was the fact. Same procedure 100 years later. You had the Legion of Justice in Chicago, targeting primarily Puerto Rican Young Lords Organization, Socialist Workers Party, and the remnants of the Black Panther Party there. FBI operation, conceded in court. American Protective League provided the manpower for the Palmer raids and the Slacker raids before that, 500,000 strong. Right-wing organization issued temporary badges by the Bureau of Investigation to go out and do what it was that was done there. And ultimately, some of the things the American Protective League did were like Lynch, IWW organizer Frank Little in Idaho. Same kind of operation as was pioneered with the Reno gang. Jesse James gang, even more the case. Same set of circumstances, this time Clay County, Missouri. This is dragging on for a dozen years. Ultimately, that case is resolved by them paying a sum of money to a member of the gang by the name of Bob Ford and his little brother Charlie, who went in and blew the back of Jesse James's head off at point blank range. You got a flat out assassination. Now, this was not a directly political figure, but the technique is recognizable in the arms raid that was conducted on the apartment of Fred Hampton, chairman of the Black Panther Party in Chicago, on the 4th of December 1969, taking out Hampton by assassination, as well as Mark Clark, downstate defense captain of the Panthers. Same.